The sun hung low over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of her father's property, watching the horizon where dust devils danced across the parched earth. Her calico dress clung to her in the oppressive heat, and she wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. 3 months had passed since the Apache warrior had first appeared on their land, and her life had not been the same since. It began on a night when the moon was nothing more than a silver sliver in the vast darkness. Sarah had been awakened by the sound of horses stamping nervously in the barn. Her father, Jonas Mitchell, was away in Tucson purchasing supplies, leaving Sarah and her younger brother Timothy alone on the farm. She grabbed the old rifle from above the doorway and stepped out onto the porch, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the shadows near the corral, she could make out figures moving stealthily. Raiders, she thought, her blood running cold. They had heard stories of outlaws who roamed the territory, preying on isolated homesteads. She raised the rifle with trembling hands, knowing that one woman and a boy of 14 stood little chance against armed men. Then she saw him. An Apache warrior emerged from the darkness like a spirit, his movements fluid and silent. He wore buckskin leggings and a vest decorated with intricate beadwork, and his long dark hair was bound with a red cloth. In his hands, he carried a rifle that he handled with practiced ease. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, but something made her pause. The warrior was not approaching the house. Instead, he was moving toward the raiders with deadly purpose. Sarah watched in stunned silence as he confronted the 3 men attempting to steal their livestock. The confrontation was brief and brutal. The Apache moved with a speed and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural in the moonlight. Within minutes, the raiders were fleeing into the night, leaving behind their tools and their courage. The warrior turned toward the house, and for a moment, Sarah found herself looking directly into his eyes. They were dark and unfathomable, holding depths she could not read. She expected him to approach, perhaps to demand payment for his intervention or to claim some spoils of his own. Instead, he simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and melted back into the shadows from which he had come. When her father returned 2 days later, Sarah told him what had happened. Jonas Mitchell was a practical man who had spent 20 years carving a life from the unforgiving desert. He knew the Apache as fierce warriors and the traditional inhabitants of this land, people with whom the white settlers existed in a state of uneasy tension. That an Apache had protected his property rather than raiding it was extraordinary, and Jonas was not a man to forget a debt. But the warrior returned. A week later, Sarah saw him again, this time standing watch on a ridge overlooking their property as a dust storm approached. He remained there for hours, a solitary figure against the churning sky, and Sarah understood that he had appointed himself their guardian. When a band of Comancheros passed through the area, terrorizing other farms, they gave the Mitchell property a wide berth, deterred by the presence of the Apache sentinel. Jonas began leaving offerings near the boundary of his land: dried meat, tobacco, blankets. They would disappear overnight, and the Apache's vigilance continued. Sarah found herself watching for him, scanning the ridges and arroyos for his distinctive silhouette. She began to wonder about him, about his life and his reasons for protecting them. Did he have a family? What had brought him to their land? Why did he stay? One evening, as Sarah was drawing water from the well, she looked up to find him standing less than 20 feet away. She gasped, her hand flying to her throat, but he made no threatening move. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she had thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was strong and angular, marked by a thin scar along his left cheekbone. His eyes, which she had thought so hard to read in the moonlight, held an intelligence and sadness that caught her off guard. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for protecting us." He studied her for a long moment, then spoke in heavily accented English. "Your father is honorable. He does not steal land that is not given. He shares water with those who ask." He gestured toward the spring that fed their well, one of the few reliable water sources in the area. "My people remember kindness." Sarah learned that his name was Nate, which meant mischievous one in Apache, though there was nothing playful about his demeanor. His band had been decimated by disease and conflict, and he was one of the few who remained free, refusing to be confined to the reservation. He had been watching the Mitchell farm for months before the night of the raid, observing Jonas's fair dealings with the Apache who occasionally came to trade or request water. Over the following weeks, a strange relationship developed. Nate would appear at irregular intervals, sometimes helping to mend fences or track down strayed cattle, always disappearing before others might see him. Sarah began to anticipate his visits, preparing extra food that she would leave in a sheltered spot near the spring. They spoke little, but an understanding grew between them, built on respect and an unspoken recognition of each other's character. Jonas noticed the change in his daughter. Sarah had always been practical and level-headed, but now there was a dreaminess in her eyes, a distraction that worried him. When he finally confronted her, she admitted the truth about their protector's visits. Jonas was silent for a long time, staring out at the land he had worked so hard to tame. "He's a good man," Jonas finally said. "I've seen his honor in his actions. But Sarah, you know the world we live in. There are those who would see any friendship between our peoples as betrayal. There are those who would kill him on sight, no questions asked." Sarah knew her father spoke the truth. The Apache wars had left deep scars on both sides. Blood had been spilled, families destroyed, trust shattered. Yet here was Nate, risking his freedom and perhaps his life to protect a white family's farm. And here was she, a farmer's daughter, finding herself drawn to a man her society deemed an enemy. The crisis came on a scorching afternoon in August. A group of soldiers from Fort Huachuca rode onto the Mitchell property, led by a hard-faced lieutenant who introduced himself as Dalton. They were tracking a renegade Apache, he explained, a warrior who had escaped the reservation and was believed to be in the area. Had the Mitchells seen any signs of Indian activity? Jonas was careful in his response, speaking truthfully but revealing nothing. He had seen Apache in the distance, he admitted, but they had not troubled his family. The lieutenant was not satisfied. He ordered his men to search the property, and Sarah watched with mounting dread as they combed through the barn, the outbuildings, the surrounding terrain. It was young Timothy who inadvertently gave them the clue they needed. One of the soldiers found the spot near the spring where Sarah had been leaving food, and Timothy, frightened by the stern-faced men with their rifles and questions, blurted out that an Apache had been helping them. The lieutenant's eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "So you've been harboring a renegade," he said, his hand resting on his sidearm. "That's a serious offense, Mitchell. Could see you lose this farm, maybe worse." Jonas's face went pale, but he stood his ground. "We've harbored no one. If an Apache chose to help us of his own accord, that's his business. We've done nothing illegal." The soldiers made camp on the property, settling in to wait for Nate to appear. Sarah felt sick with fear and guilt. She had brought this danger to him, however unintentionally. That night, she slipped out of the house and made her way to the spring, praying he would somehow know not to come. But he was already there, a shadow among shadows. "Go," she whispered urgently. "There are soldiers. They're waiting for you." Nate looked at her calmly. "I know. I have been watching since they arrived." He paused, then added, "I will leave this place. Your family will be safe." "No." The word burst from Sarah before she could stop it. "You've done nothing wrong. You've only helped us. It's not fair." Something flickered in his dark eyes. "Fair," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "There is no fair in this world, Sarah Mitchell. There is only survival." It was the first time he had spoken her name, and hearing it from his lips sent a strange warmth through her chest. "There must be another way," she insisted. But even as she spoke, she knew there wasn't. The soldiers would hunt him relentlessly, and her family would suffer for sheltering him. When Nate left that night, Sarah felt as if part of her soul had been torn away. The soldiers remained for 3 more days before the lieutenant finally gave up and led his men back to the fort. But the damage was done. Word spread that the Mitchells had been friendly with a renegade Apache. Some of their neighbors began to avoid them. Supplies became harder to obtain in town. Sarah felt the weight of hostile stares and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Jonas watched his daughter grow pale and quiet, the light fading from her eyes. He was a man who believed in paying his debts and standing by his principles, even when it cost him. After much thought and a long night of prayer, he made his decision. 2 weeks after the soldiers left, Jonas rode out to the territorial governor's office in Tucson. He had done business with several influential men over the years, and he called in every favor he was owed. He told the story of Nature's protection of his family, of the warrior's honor and courage. He argued that not all Apache were hostile, that peace might be built on individual acts of respect and recognition. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, but Jonas was persistent. He secured a letter of safe conduct for Nate, a document that would protect him from arrest as long as he remained on Mitchell property and caused no trouble. It was an unusual arrangement, one that many officials opposed, but Jonas had allies who owed him debts of their own, and eventually he prevailed. When Jonas returned home with the precious document, he found Sarah standing at her usual spot overlooking the desert. He stood beside her and told her what he had done. Then he spoke the words that would change everything. "If he'll have you, and if you'll have him, I give my blessing," Jonas said quietly. "He protected my farm, my family, my daughter. He's shown more honor than many white men I've known. And I'm not blind, Sarah. I've seen how you look at each other when you think no one's watching." Sarah turned to her father with tears streaming down her face. "Pa, are you sure? People already talk. If I marry him, we'll be outcasts." Jonas put his weathered hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Let them talk. I've spent my life building something here, and it won't mean a damn thing if I can't stand by what's right. That man risked everything to protect us. Least I can do is give him a home and a family, if that's what you both want." That evening, Sarah walked to the spring one last time. She didn't know if Nate would come, didn't know if he had already left the territory forever. But as the sun set and the desert cooled, she saw his familiar silhouette appear on the ridge. He approached slowly, cautiously, until he stood before her. Sarah held out the letter of safe conduct, explaining what her father had done. Then, her heart pounding, she spoke the words that had been given to her. "You protected my farm," she said, though her voice shook with emotion. "My father says I must marry you." Nate was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then slowly, something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "Must?" he repeated, and there was a hint of the mischievousness his name promised in his voice. Sarah felt her own lips curve upward, despite her nervousness. "Well," she amended. "He says he'd be honored if you would consider it." "As would I." Nate reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from a hard life. "I am a hunted man," he said seriously. "My people are scattered and broken. I can offer you only difficulty and danger." "And I'm a farmer's daughter in the middle of the desert," Sarah replied. "I can offer you hard work, simple food, and a society that will never fully accept you. But I can also offer you loyalty, respect, and whatever love grows between us." In the fading light, with the desert wind whispering around them, Nate lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that seemed to bridge two worlds. "Then I accept," he said simply. "And I will spend my life proving worthy of your father's trust and your courage." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony that scandalized the territory and inspired whispered stories that would be told for generations. Some called it madness, others called it treason. But for Sarah and Nate, it was simply the beginning of a life built on mutual respect, hard-won understanding, and the belief that honor and courage could exist anywhere, in anyone, regardless of the color of their skin or the culture of their birth.